So we're going to finish the Shema today and move on into the next section. Last week, I just want to just briefly mention the topics that we looked at last week with the Shema. So first of all, we continued our look in the Mishnah about how to recite the Shema, different details, and we saw that the rabbis are quite concerned that the Shema be recited in a particular way. First of all, clarity and precision is extremely important. We saw that down to the pronunciation of individual vowels correctly. That was very important, is very important for the Shema. Secondly, language. We saw that it's permissible to recite Shema in a different language that one understands. So the idea of understanding what we're saying is really important. Of course, the word Shema itself means to listen and understand. So you can see how it might even be preferable to recite the Shema in a different language if the Hebrew doesn't make any sense. But that same degree of precision and following the correct rules of grammar and pronunciation in the vernacular is also an important detail. And then we looked at the theology of the three paragraphs, and that actually helped us understand why they were placed in the particular order in which they appear in our Siddur, notably with the third paragraph being out of chronological order in the Torah. And each of the three paragraphs was seen to represent a different idea. The first one, the Shema and V'ahavta, is the acceptance of the yoke of heaven. So it's a Kabbalat Ol Malchut Shamayim. We're accepting God as the creator of the universe and having, as being our God and having dominion over us. The second is the Ol Mitzvot, the acceptance of the yoke of the commandments. And then finally, we saw a discussion between, well, why is the third one from Numbers, why is it last? And the answer basically being referring to tzitzit, which is one of the major themes of the paragraph, and that it specifically says when you look at them. And anytime we see a mention of looking at something, the rabbis understand that to be a time-bound reference to daytime. And therefore, since the third paragraph is operative, or at least the tzitzit part of it is only operative during the daytime, which is only 50% of the other paragraphs, therefore it comes last, which I guess means that it's less important or something, at least along that way of thinking about it. So that brings us now to the third paragraph. And just to remind ourselves about what we're talking about, begins, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe lemor. Then the Lord said to Moses as follows, speak to the Israelite people and instruct them to make for themselves fringes on the corners of their garments throughout the ages. Let them attach a cord of blue to the fringe at each corner. That shall be your fringe. Right? We repeat tzitzit 3 times. Look at it and recall all the commandments of the Lord and observe them. Right? There's the look at it. So that's the daytime reference. So that you do not follow your heart and eyes in your lustful urge. Thus you shall be reminded to observe all my commandments and to be holy to your God. All right, so far we're kind of on a single theme. We've got the tzitzit as almost like tying a string around your finger, right? In fact, it's exactly like that, right? Why do you tie a string around your finger? To remember something. Well, that's exactly what the tzitzit are there to do. So I always ask the B'nai Mitzvah students at their rehearsal about the talit and their tzitzit. I ask them, what is the most important part of the talit? Usually they get to the right answer, tzitzit. And then I ask, well, what are the tzitzit for? And then they usually don't remember that class. So then I have them open up and I have them read this and they read it. And then hopefully they put 2 and 2 together and they say, it reminds us of all of the mitzvot that are in the Torah. So it's a reminder to do them. So which, if we think about it didn't mention this in the Mishnah, but if we think about this in terms of the theme of the second paragraph, which is all about the acceptance of the commandments, So this would make perfect sense to follow that. Now that we've accepted the commandments, we need something to remind us of them on an ongoing basis. And so the tzitzit come in with that reminder.
Rabbi, is that your translation? Because I'm looking at the Siddur and some of the sentences, for instance, it says, nor led astray by your eyes. It doesn't say anything but lustful urge.
Yeah, that may be a little bit. Let's see, what does it say? Acharei, so it's lo taturu acharei levavchem ve'acharei nechem. You shall not turn aside after your, or go astray after your heart and after your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And remember, heart is the mind.
Okay.
Right. So, or really anything going on internally in our thoughts or emotions, right? And then asheratem zonim acharehem. So zonim is a word that does mean to follow a lustful urge, right? It definitely has a sexual component. A zonah is a prostitute.
Oh, okay.
So in your lustful urge is not a terrible translation.
Okay, so this one in the Siddur is more liberal, in other words.
What does it say in the Siddur?
It says, remember, let me see, be seduced by your heart, nor led astray by your eyes.
All right, well, seduced, I mean, that carries the same connotation of kind of a sexual drawing.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think that translators are picking up on similar things. Look, we saw Maimonides talking about saying the Shema in translation.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, and the accuracy is important. Of course, it's impossible to fully translate something. So they're doing their best. And then finally, we get this mention of Kedoshim, right? You shall be holy to your God. And it's tied into mitzvot. So through performance of the mitzvot, that is the recipe for the Jewish people for being holy to God. Right? But another understanding of holy can also mean set apart, set aside. So if Israel has a unique covenantal relationship with God, it's through the mitzvot, which are Israel's obligation to God as part of the commandment. That's our part in having this set aside relationship with God. Then finally, the last sentence, we switch gears. I, the Lord, am your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to be your God. I, the Lord, your God. Right? Suddenly we get Egypt. Right? What does that have to do with the rest of this paragraph or even the rest of the Shema? We've had no mention of Egypt, of Exodus, of any of that.
Emphasizing the Israelites, the Jewish people. I don't know.
All right, so it's an important, now in the context in Numbers, this comes at the end of Parshat Shlach Lecha, the sending out of the spies. And this is the very final passage in the parasha, and it actually shares some very similar language of the spies going out on their mission. What's their job is to use the same word, lo taturu, don't go astray, don't follow after. So that's exactly what the spies are told to do. They have to tatur et haaretz. They've got to go about in the land and inspect it. And what happens to them is that they're led astray by their hearts and their eyes. And so then at the end, we get this instruction for the tzitzit. And so the reminder that I, the Lord, am your God, makes more sense in its context, right? Because it's being delivered to the Israelites right after they kind of screwed up by going after their hearts and eyes in not having faith in God. And so God at that moment reminds them, well, you guys clearly need more reminders. So, use these strings and don't forget that I brought you out of Egypt. So that's an integral part of the covenant.
I find that the tzitzit piece, it's not easy to be mindful of looking at it, to be reminded. When you tie a string around your finger, you feel it and you more readily see it. So to me, that symbolism, it's there, but are you really conscious of it's there?
How does it work? Fantastic question. I'm so glad you asked that question. Okay. Talmud, right? So this is the Talmud. This is a famous teaching that yesterday I was listening into my Saul's religion class. My Saul goes to Catholic high school. Okay, so the kids had to whatever they're studying the Torah, Old Testament, and covenant is what I found is that in Catholic education they really like to focus on the concept of covenant, and so they're talking about the teachers talking about I forget the exact question that they were filling out a worksheet. They had to fill in the worksheet, and they were talking about Moses is up on Mount Sinai, and like how many instructions did Moses get from God at Mount Sinai? And the correct answer was 613. Right. So this is in Catholic high school religion class that they're teaching that there are 613 commandments in the Torah, and I just got a kick out of that because. This is where the Torah never says there are 613 commandments in me. Doesn't appear anywhere. Right? This passage we're about to look at, this is where it first appears. All right. So we're talking Babylonian Talmud. So sometime, let's say 3rd to 5th century of the Common Area in Bavel, and we get Darash Rabbi Simlai. Right. Rabbi Simlai gave a drash. Right. Already, the language itself tells us that this is drash. He expounded, right? Sheish me'ot v'shlosh esrei mitzvot ne'emru leMoshe. 613 commandments were told to Moses. Shalosh me'ot v'shishim v'chamesh lavin. 365 laws, thou shalt nots. Right? Kiminyan yamot hachama. According to the numbers of the days of the sun, in other words, the solar year, right? Umatayim va'arba'im u'shmona es shmona asa keneged evarav shel adam, and 248 did he make, according or ase, positive commandments, thou shalts, corresponding to the limbs of a person. All right, so we've got 365 positive, 365 negative, 248 positive, and that comes to 613, right? This is where it first appears. Now, first of all, don't be too precise about that 248 number and the limbs of the body, right? That is not, if you talk to an anatomist, that is not what the anatomist will tell you. And what exactly does he mean by limbs? Does that include tendons or, who knows? It doesn't matter, actually. What matters is, first of all, he's divided up the commandments in the Torah into 2 different categories. Negative, thou shalt nots, and thou shalts, right? And then he's given each of them significance. So 365 days of the year, thou shalt not, right? In other words, every single day of the year, right? From where the sun is in the sky today until next time the sun is in the sky today, every single day, I've got to be on guard for all of these negative commandments, right? I can't, I've got to watch out. There's no, like if you've seen the movie, what is it? The Purge, right? We get one day a year where there's no laws and people can do whatever they want, and that does not exist, right? Every day you have to observe the thou shalt nots, and with every limb of my body, I have to be pursuing the positive commandments, right? I've got my religious obligations, the things I'm supposed to do, and I've got to do that. I've got to be all in on that with my whole body. Susan, yeah.
Is it possible that everybody accepted that there were 613 commandments, and that was just in the back of their brain, and then this was just part of a sermon that he said, whoa, where do we get the 613 from? And now he does the drash.
It is possible. Yeah. The problem is that this is the first time it's mentioned.
Oh, could it be that it's just so?
Yeah. And we see that with a lot of things where the rabbis just assume something. Rabbi, if it's using the word drash, so presume it like he's got a bunch of students in front of him and he's giving a drash. He's trying to teach them something. And I guess my question on this particular teaching is what's he trying to convey here? I think he's trying to convey something about time in our bodies and following the mitzvot, right? We always have to be on guard against transgressions. With all of our being, we have to, actively, pursue all of the positive commandments that we're instructed with. And together that gives us this 613. So it kind of serves as a mnemonic of some sort about how the mitzvot are supposed to operate in our lives. But you're right. So the number 613, it feels like it's a familiar number.
I've got the list here of the 248. Looks like bones, and it goes to list all the bones.
List this 248 bones?
Yeah, so it starts with the list that equals 101 of, ankles, knees, thighs, hands, forearms, and then it goes, right. And then it says times 2 is 202 because it's on each side of the body, plus 18 vertebrae, 9 in the head, 8 in the neck, totaling 46. 202 plus 46 equals 248. So they looked for a number that would equal 248, and they decided to choose bones.
Okay, there you go. That Romeo, yeah.
Can't hear him.
Romeo, I can't hear you.
So they were doing autopsies back then.
Oh, sure, of course.
They were eating people.
Where did you get your information from, Sherry?
I looked online I said 248 body parts, and it brought me to a website saying that it.
What website is it?
Sorry, got to go back to it here. I got out of it. It is judaism.stackexchange.com.
What?
STACK.
Sounds. I think that is a listserv of some sort.
Okay.
If you look at a medical textbook, you might not find the same number. I can go search on
yeah, of course.
Close enough for symbolism's sake.
All right. So Romeo, do you have your microphone working? Or all right. Oh, 360. All right. So the question is about the calendar. So they knew that a solar year was 365 and a quarter days, right? The Gregorian calendar has to do with the fraction, basically, and the fact that our rotations are in fact not even, are not round numbers. And so in order to be astronomically accurate, we have to occasionally add in some extra days. And so that's where the Gregorian Justinian calendar bit comes in. Okay, so let's continue the passage from the Talmud. Rav Hamnuna, Samar Rav Hamnuna, Mikra says, so Rav Hamnuna says, what's the meaning of this verse from Deuteronomy 33:4? And this probably sounds familiar. Torah tziva lanu Moshe, morasha. The rest of Kehilat Yaakov is the completion. So Torah tziva lanu, commanded to us, Moshe, did Moses, morasha. Morasha is an inheritance. So let's maybe turn the syntax around. Moses commanded us Torah as an inheritance. Right? What does Torah mean?
Teaching.
Sorry, what was that?
Teaching.
Teaching or instruction, right? Right. That's that. So Moses commanded us an instruction as an inheritance, right? But Rav Hamnuna, he's also giving a drash here. What does he say? Torah begimatria. So Torah using gematria, where each letter has a numerical value. Shitmea v'chadsreya. Shitmea is sheish meot, 600, v'chadsre, and 11, right? So let's do it. Torah, so a taf, 400. Vav is 6. Resh is 200, and Hey is 5. So we've got 400 plus 6 plus 200 plus 5 equals 611. Well, that's not 613. We're short a couple, right? Anochi v'lo yelecha mipi hagvura shmanum, right? So Anochi and lo yelecha from the mouth of the mighty one were heard, right? So what are Anochi and lo yelecha? Commandments number 1 and 2, right? I, the Lord, am your God, etc. And then lo yeh is there shall not be before you any other gods. So the commandment of God's self-identification as God and the instruction not to have any other gods, he is in this drash are identified as 2 commandments that were heard not from Moses to the Israelites, but were heard directly from God to the Israelites. And this is part of a larger midrash, which is looking at the narrative in Exodus, where God comes down on the mountain and the people freak out and says, Moses, you go tell us what they are. So the thing is that the Israelites had to have heard something before telling Moses. They needed to hear something in order to freak out. And so the midrash is that they heard the first 2 commandments, God's self-identification and the commandment not to have any other gods. And then at that point, they were too terrified and designated Moses to be their intermediary. So what does that mean? Now, looking back at the verse from Deuteronomy, Torah tziva lanu Moshe, 611 did Moses command to us as an inheritance. And then the other 2 were directly from God. And that gets us to 613.
But what about the repetition of the 10 Commandments in Devarim?
Well, those aren't included as separate commandments.
Okay.
Right. All right. So we've got 2, I would suggest, playful drashes, which are trying to provide some meaning to this number 613. And the first one we saw, about the body and the days of the year. And in the second one, it's doing a drash on this verse, which is, showing that Moses is the chokek, he's the lawgiver for 611 of them, and the other 2 came directly from God, right? Both of these are homiletical types of drashes.
What kind?
Homiletical, like a homily, like a sermon.
Oh,
These are
got it.
sermons, essentially.
So which are the 2 that came directly from God?
The first 2 of the 10 commandments.
Ah.
I am the Lord your God, and you shall not have any other gods before me.
Cool. Okay.
Okay, so Sherry, your question was, how do the tzitzit remind us of the mitzvot, right? I don't look at these and inherently think mitzvot, right? Okay, first question, what are the 613 commandments? If you Google them, you will find lists. The problem is that neither Rabbi Simlai nor Rav Hamnuna identified what the 613 commandments were. Nowhere in the Talmud is there a list of 613 commandments. If these teachings are sometime, sometime before the 5th century of the Common Era, it took about 1,000 years until somebody actually sat down to write the 613 commandments. So Maimonides, before he wrote the Mishnah Torah, his big comprehensive law code, he wrote a smaller book called Sefer HaMitzvot, the Book of the Commandments, in which he identifies the 365 negative commandments and the 248 positive commandments. He puts them into two separate categories. First, all the negative, and then he lists them in order. And Maimonides was of the belief that there were reasons for all of the mitzvot. And so he provided what he thought his reasoning was for each of those commandments. And this was an important work for him to do in preparation for the Mishnah Torah, because he needed to be able to point to, if he's going to give a law code of all of Jewish law, he needs to know what the commandments in the Torah are. And so at the beginning of each section, he actually identifies which of the commandments, negative and positive, are in operation for the section that he's about to deal with. And there have been other thinkers shortly after Rambam that also went to this list of 613. There's another book called Sefer HaChinuch, the Book of Education. Not exactly sure who wrote it. I think I've heard Rabbi Levi from Barcelona. And that, similar to Maimonides, it lists the commandments and reasons for all of them. And then Nachmanides also has a list or talks about the 613, and they don't all agree with each other about which mitzvot are deoraita and which are derabanan, which things that the Torah says to do or not to do actually qualify as one of these 613. There are some, I mean, for the most part, they're all in agreement, but there are some areas of disagreement, right? And by the way, I listening into my son's class the other day. A teacher put up a chart showing the difference between the 10 commandments as seen according to Judaism, according to the Protestants, and according to Catholics, and it's different, right?
Really?
And by the way, if you actually read the 10 commandments, when I read the 10 commandments, I come up with 13 commandments.
When you read his
If
version?
I read it and look how many things are commanded, my count is 13. Right? We're not going to do it right now, but I invite you to do, right? So it's a matter of interpretation.
Okay.
Right? It's a matter of drash.
Okay.
Right.
So whether you honor your parents or just your mother and not your father? Or...
No, I took that as one.
Oh, okay.
One command, yeah. The Catholics, they divide up, and what we have is number 10, don't covet your wife. They have as separate from don't cover your neighbor's house and his other belongings. They split them. The Jewish and the Protestant version have them as a single commandment. Anyways, it's
What a good teacher.
Yeah,
So-
sounds like a very pluralist Catholic school.
Yeah.
well, although she did say that it's if you Google it, you'll probably find the Jewish version. But then she said, but this is the correct one. But I think she meant like for purposes of this class, like this is a Catholic school, so this is the one that you want to look.
Interesting.
But no, yeah, my son likes her a lot. He finds her be a good teacher. Okay, so.
Could I ask about the 613, that there's 613 seeds in a pomegranate? Is that just a coincidence, or do we try to match those up for a reason?
Well, I would invite you to count the seeds in a pomegranate. In fact, I would invite you to count the seeds in 2 pomegranates. And first of all, determine whether or not you get this, they have the same number of seeds, and then what that number is, right? So
When I retire, I'll try that out.
So that 613 seeds in a pomegranate, again, this is homiletical,
Okay.
right?
All right.
So, and by the way, it's not saying it's true and it's not true, right? It's not true in the sense that, biologically, pomegranates don't have 613 seeds, right? You might get lucky and have one pomegranate. What are the odds of that? Probably pretty small. But the truth is that we look at this fruit and it has these layers of symbolism. And so if, as a religion and as a culture, we looked at a pomegranate and we say, this is a fruit of life, and it's a fruit of blessing, and it has connotations of being prosperous. It's also it's a fertility sign because of all of those seeds inside of it. And now we're saying this also has a reminder of Torah. Like, that's true also. It has, because we give it that layer of meaning. So yeah. So let's go back to tzitzit. And while we're on the topic of gematria, tzadi is 90. Yud is 10. And now we've got another tzadi, which is another 9. And now another yud. and then a taf, which is 400. So if we add these up, what do we get?
85.
600, right?
So where's the other 13?
Okay, where do we get the other 13? This is a picture of tzitzit. Above, you can see it's all white. Below, they've used techelet, which is the blue string. The way that they've tied these techelet is exactly the same as tying it with all white string, although there actually are different traditions for how to tie tzitzit if you're using techelet. But in all of them, we have certain things that are in common, all the methods of tying. So look at the knots. How many knots do you see?
3, 4,
Big ones there, I see 4.
5?
8.
So there are 5, right? So there's
Oh, 5 on
1,
each side.
2, 3, 4, 5.
Yeah.
All right. How about strings? Can you make them out?
6.
6?
Well, no.
8.
4 on each side.
4 on each side, right? So it's 8. So the way you tie tzitzit is you get 4 long strings and you fold them over, fold them in half, and so you get 8 strings coming down.
8.
So we get 8 strings.
Okay, there it is.
Now we add them together, 613. All right. Isn't that great? Right?
So
This is not a coincidence, right? The reason we tie tzitzit this way is to get the number, right? And because, you know, in and of itself, like it only has meaning if I think, oh, this has meaning. But now if I know what the gematria is, right? Gematria is a tool for drash. It's a homiletical tool. If I know what the gematria is, then the teaching sticks much better. So I know that it's the tzitzit, then the word tzitzit plus the way that I tie them equals 613. It equals the number of mitzvot in the Torah. And then as I read the 3rd paragraph of the Shema, which says, by the way, when you look at them, you'll be reminded. So if you look not in our Siddur at Sinai, but if you look in the Art Scroll Siddur, there'll actually be a little asterisk or even in brackets in the middle of prayer saying it's customary to look at your tzitzit at this time, to actually hold them up in front of your eyes, right? And so then if it has, you know, then if I know this, if I know the code, then it has the meaning that it's supposed to have for me. This is like Dan Brown, like in Da Vinci Code, symbology, right?
Yeah.
Where we hide meaning in words or in symbols and things like that, which if you're not initiated, you don't know it, right? But if you're initiated, then you know. And now all of us are initiated.
Let's have a tzitzit party.
So,
So technically, would you just need 4 strands of strings, 1 on each corner? For instance, my talit has fringe all around and then long ones. So
the tassel, the fringe all around, like on the sides,
just
pure decoration. Pure decoration.
So you just need 4.
You need the ones in the corners. Yeah, and by the way, it's the string is, you can't just go to the string store and buy string. It's supposed to be string that is made specifically to be tzitzit. And you can, they're not expensive. You can buy them. They're like $3 or $4 for a package. It's not expensive unless you want the techelet, and then that gets expensive. But
They still make it with a snail?
yeah, it's made out of an extract from a snail shell, a sea snail called the Murex trunculus, which lives in the Mediterranean. And
Surprised it hasn't been hunted to extinction.
I think it's pretty fertile. But when you hear royal blue, right, this blue dye that was extremely expensive, this was a blue dye made out of the Murex trunculus shell. It was widespread in the ancient world, and then at a certain point, the trade in this dye dried up as the economy in the Roman Empire dried up somewhere in the 4th century or something like that, and then Jews stopped using it because it wasn't available, and the secret for how to make it was lost. And then in the 1800s, the interest started to become renewed, and there was a Hasidic group that really wanted to discover it, and they came up with a theory, and it turns out it's probably wrong. And then somebody else came up with the Murex trunculus, and they found archaeological evidence, and it seems it's pretty convincing that it's this particular kind of snail which is used to make this dye.
Robert, can I make a comment?
Yes.
If you count together 6, 1, and 3, that's 10. Is that a reference to the commandments?
Oh, 6, 1. I've never heard that suggested.
Good try.
Yeah, good.
But maybe you could, because there are other lines of Drash which say that all 613, that basically the 10 commandments are broad categories that encompass all 613 commandments. And so that might fit into that, to your Drash, Miriam.
Okay.
All right. So let's, this is the entire Shema. We've got Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. The Baruch Shem line, which is not part of the Shema, so here it's in parentheses. And then we've got all 3 paragraphs. So I ran it through word count in Microsoft Word, and I got a grand total of 245 words.
Ooh, close to 248.
It is close to 240. Wouldn't it be nice if I had gotten to 248?
Did you do a character count?
I did not do a character. I had some confusion at first because I knew that it's supposed to be 245, and I read that in lots of places, and I couldn't get there. And then I realized that number includes the Baruch Shem line, which I think is kind of interesting that we need that line. But anyway, 245, that's pretty good. It's close to 248. There's a general rule in Gematria that plus or minus 1 is an acceptable margin of error, right?
Yeah.
So, but this is a little bit more than plus or minus 1. So it would be really nice if there were 248 words. So I need 3 more. So where do I get 3 more?
Ooh.
Oh. Okay, let's in our Siddurim. Let's look. If you've got the Siddur Sim Shalom for weekdays,
And Matt.
Yeah.
we are.
Is it Emet or is it El Melech?
No, we'll get there. We're on page 33.
Well, we've gotten very familiar with El Melech.
Yeah, we have.
Last
Well,
7
hold on, jump in the gun there, Max.
Yeah, Max, hold your horses.
Hold your horses. In the blue Siddur Sim Shalom, it's for Shabbat and weekdays. It's on page 112. But really, you can look at any Shema in the Siddur. Okay, so in Sim Shalom, at the top of the page, it says, if there is no minyan, add
Right. El Melech.
El Melech Ne'eman. Okay, so 3 words. This gets us to 248.
Just hope there's no mignon, so. Yeah.
So if there's no minyan, right? And so at Sinai, we've been not considering ourselves to be a minyan on Zoom. So the prayer leaders have been inserting these 3 words in front, and as they should. Now look at the acronym formed by El Melech Ne'eman.
Amen.
Amen.
Oh,
Aleph Mem Nun. Isn't that interesting, right?
Yeah.
What is El Melech Ne'eman? El is God, Melech king, Ne'eman is faithful. God is a faithful king, right? Fairly
Faithful
straightforward.
sovereign.
Why is this here? Where did this expression come from?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Good question. I'll tell you where it came from. On the previous page, we had the concluding blessing for the prayer of Ahava Rabbah, right? And Baruch Atah Hashem habocher ba'amo Yisrael be'ahava. So at some point, someone wanted to make sure that we knew that one should say Amen when the leader says that closing bracha. I might think that because I'm going right into the Shema, I don't want to have any interruptions.
Mm.
And so they printed in the Siddur Amen. Or they wrote it, but probably before printing press. They wrote El Melech Na'aman into the Siddur to make sure that I knew that I should say Amen. Right? Maybe initially they just wrote an Aleph Mem Nun, and maybe somebody else later on said, "What is that Aleph Mem Nun doing there? It must stand for something." El Melech Na'aman. That sounds good. In any event, we ended up having this printed in Siddurim, and then in Ashkenazi tradition. Sometime in the 12th, 13th century, whatever, it started to become accustomed to actually recite those words in certain circumstances. But this will get us to 248. But what is this business about if there is no minyan?
Mm.
There is a minyan, there isn't a minyan. Okay. What if there is a minyan? So then let's turn the page. We're on 113 now, or 34. This is confusing. All right. The way that this is published in Sim Shalom is quite confusing. In the one for Shabbat and festivals, we get at the end of the paragraph, Ani Adonai Elohechem. So if you look on the page that I'm sharing on my screen, Ani Adonai Elohechem, it ends in gray. It ends there. That is the end of the Shema.
Mhm.
Right. That's the end of that passage from Numbers. But then you can see there's a box right in front of Adonai.
Elohechem emet.
Adonai Elohechem emet. So what is supposed to happen here?
You're supposed to say Amen.
No, there's no
Just
amen
treat
here, right? This is not a
Big
bracha,
word there.
right? In the one for weekdays, it's actually published differently. And they've got emet appearing afterwards in brackets, which is also confusing. Well, I'll get to showing all this, but I'll say initially that when we're davening with a minyan, there's no El Melech Na'aman at the beginning, but the Shaliach Tzibur, the person leading services, at the conclusion of the Amidah, says Adonai Elohechem Emet. And that gives us the extra 3 words that we need. But it's a little confusing about how to do this. Now, Mike, I'm curious about how this appears in Mishkan Tefillah, both the El Melech Ne'eman at the beginning and how it's framed here at the end.
We don't have the El Melech at the beginning. We do have the Adonai Elohechem Emet at the end, and we don't have the second paragraph nor half of the third paragraph. So we can't be going for 248.
So it's definitely not 245. Okay.
And at Shir Chadash, we don't say the emet. And I don't know why, but we never say, it's there in the prayer book, but
It's
with
printed,
not.
but we don't say it.
Okay. All right. So we'll go into this a little bit deeper, but just going back to the drash, the 248, right? With every limb in my body, I should be striving to fulfill the positive commandments of the Torah. Well, think about one of the major themes of the Shema, the second paragraph specifically, which is accepting upon myself the yoke of the mitzvot, right? I accept upon myself my obligation to the mitzvot. And I have the reminders that appear in the third paragraph. So to have this meaning of 248 limbs specifically associated with the Shema makes sense, right? So, you know, what I do is when I'm reading the Shema, I get to those words tzitzit. You know, we have the tradition of kissing our tzitzit, or looking at our tzitzit, and as a way of, you know, we kiss them as a way of saying that the mitzvot are beloved to us, right? So I think about maybe not all 613 or all 248 positive commandments, but at least one, right? What is something that I have an obligation to do as a Jew, right? For a prayer that we say all the time, it's hard to, you can't be conscious of 613 commandments, not to mention the fact that more than half of them are not accessible to us at the present time. So, but I can think about one obligation. And so that's, for me personally, that's how I relate to saying these words and wearing tzitzit. Okay. This is how it appears in Siddur Sim Shalom for weekdays. So that's the red one. All right, so I grayed out the parts that are not super relevant to this discussion. We get to Ani Adonai Elohechem, that's the end of the Shema. We have a box right there in front of God's name. And then in brackets, we have Emet afterwards. And then before the next prayer, the beginning of the next prayer, says the bracha after Kriyat Shema, the blessing after the recitation of the Shema. And then it starts the blessing. Emet v'yatziv, the first two words are in bold, and then it just kind of continues at that point. Then there's a footnote at the bottom of the page. The word emet, truth, serves as a bridge between the Shema and the bracha which follows. We do not pause. The tzitzit are released only as the second paragraph of that bracha begins.
Released.
Letting go of the tzitzit. Okay, this is what appears in the Siddur Sim Shalom for weekdays. Based on what you see here, how are we supposed to recite the words?
Hashem Elohechem emet v'yatziv.
So you're saying just go straight through. Let's say I'm davening with a minyan. What do I do? I don't know either. So, because this is really confusing. I'm not sure what this means. Right? Let's say I'm davening with a minyan. We're doing the third paragraph silently, let's say. I get to Ani Adonai Elohechem. Do I say emet? Or do I wait for the leader to come in? Do I stop at Elohechem and the leader says Adonai Elohechem emet? And then do I repeat emet after the leader and continue v'yatziv, or do I just continue v'yatziv? It's not clear, right? I think they don't do a good job of explaining it. And the version for Shabbat doesn't say anything. There isn't even a footnote at the bottom of the page. It's not clear what I'm supposed to do here. Okay, so let's go back to the Talmud, because this is where it comes from. Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So we got Rabbi Abahu saying in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan, an early teacher from the land of Israel. Halacha ka Rabbi Yehuda. He says the halacha, Jewish law, follows Rabbi Yehuda. Damar, who said, Bein Elohechem le'emet v'yatziv lo yafsik. Between the word Elohechem and emet v'yatziv, you should not have any interruption. So let's see what he's talking about. Okay, we've got Elohechem right here. And Adonai Elohechem. So between Adonai Elohechem and emet v'yatziv, no interruptions. We should go straight. Ani Adonai Elohechem emet v'yatziv v'nachon v'yak, right? Straight on through. That's what we seem to be saying here. Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. So then Rabbi Abahu said that Rabbi Yochanan said. Remember, so we got Rabbi Yehuda as the first one who taught this. And now Rabbi Yochanan is giving some teaching on top of that, right? So we know we're not supposed to have any interruption between the end of the Shema and the prayer that follows. emet v'yatziv. So Rabbi Yochanan says, "My tamei de Rabbi Yehuda." What's the reason? What is Rabbi Yehuda's reason? Why should I not have any interruption? Answer: Dichtiv, as it is written, "Vadonai Elohim emet," and the Lord God is true. All right. Well, where is that from? Answer: it's from Jeremiah. So let's look what Jeremiah says. Vadonai Elohim emet, hu Elohim chayim umelech olam, mekitzpo tir'ash ha'aretz v'lo yachilu goyim zamo. But the Lord is truly God. He is a living God, the everlasting King. At his wrath, the earth quakes, and nations cannot endure his rage. Right? So this is the prophet kind of going on, right? So what does the prophet say? Adonai Elohim emet. So we have some overlap. Adonai Elohim in Jeremiah, and we have Adonai Elohechem in the end of the third paragraph of the Shema. The chem on the end is a pronomial suffix. Possessive pronomial suffix. Your God, right? It's yours, right? Adonai Elohechem, the Lord your God. So that's how. So Numbers ends the Lord your God. Jeremiah begins the Lord God is true or truth.
Is it truth as in it's the truth that it's the Lord your God, or God embodies truth?
Yeah, so is emet a noun, an adjective? What is truly? Truly is an adverb here.
Adverb.
I don't know.
Yeah, Maxor Lev Shalem puts it as truly.
Truly, yeah, I don't know. Adonai Elohim emet. It feels like it should be a noun in the context. Adonai Elohim emet. The Lord God is true, really, or is truth, the capital T.
Yeah.
Hu Elohim chayim umelech olam. He is the living God and King of the world, or King of eternity. Right? It's right. I mean, Jeremiah is saying that there's only one God.
Yeah.
That's the all-powerful God, right? So, all right. So, but what is, now let's go back to the Talmud. We have Rabbi Yehuda as interpreted by Rabbi Yochanan. We're supposed to go straight from the end of the Shema into the next prayer. And we've got this interesting linkage, right? We've got this interesting way to connect the end of the Shema and the beginning of the next prayer. The end of the Shema, Adonai Elohechem. The beginning of the next prayer, Emet v'yatziv. Well, hey, that sounds like Jeremiah, right? Jeremiah links those two together, right? That's cool, right? Maybe Emet v'yatziv was written that way because of the Jeremiah text, right? But he wants to make sure that we don't do something that's going to get rid of the, that connecting aspect of Jeremiah. So he says we should make sure that we go continuous from the end of the Shema into the beginning of the next prayer. All right, but now remember, Rabbi Abahu is the one who brought all of this to us. So he says, Choser ve'omer emet, eino choser ve'omer emet. So this is kind of I think probably the editor of the Gemara throwing the question in to help us understand what's going on. Does he go back and say emet, or does he not go back and say emet? Right? Do I say emet twice? Right? So as I go along, I see in my Siddur, it's printed in this way. And so should I say Adonai Elohechem emet in order to recite the Jeremiah verse and then pick up emet v'yatziv v'nachon to begin the next prayer? Or is one emet good enough? Right? Can the emet serve double duty? Amar Rabbi Abahu, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. Okay, so Rabbi Abahu is going to give us the answer, and he's going to credit Rabbi Yochanan for it. Choser ve'omer emet. He should go back and he should say emet. He should repeat it. Rabba Amar. Rabba does not like that answer. He says eino choser ve'omer emet. So Rabba says, no, you don't. You can't repeat it. The emet has to serve double duty. right? Why? Because to repeat it would be an interruption, right? What was the initial statement? The initial statement was we have to go straight from the end of the Shema, Adonai Elohechem, into emet v'yatziv, into the next word without any interruption. So he's suggesting that if I said an extra emet, that extra emet would be an interruption. So there was this guy who was davening in front of Rabbah, right? You see the translation is descended to lead the service. So that's actually the language that they used for a person to be a shaliach tzibur, to lead services. They would descend before the ark. So it sounds like, there might have been actually something that was down lower, a step down or something in front of the ark. So Shamei Rabbah damar emet emet trezimne. So Rabbah hears this guy saying emet twice. Right? He does what Rabbi Abahu says. Amar Rabbah. Rabbah says, Kol emet emet tafse lahai. Right? Every emet caught this guy. In other words, he's making fun of him. Like, this guy really likes saying emet a lot, right? Rabbah's he's critiquing him for saying emet twice. Now, I think that maybe there is a theological element here as well, which is saying if I say emet twice, maybe I'm saying there's two different truths, right? And we've seen this kind of thing before, where we're concerned about any statement that might suggest an additional deity, right? The rabbis are concerned with.
Yeah, so that's how I was interpreting it. Like, I am truly your God. I'm not a fake God.
Yeah.
I am your one God versus the truth.
So
Sorry.
you can see already there's some dispute in the Talmud about the proper way to end the Shema. Now, notice there is no discussion here about getting to the number 248 and the Shaliach Tzibur saying this and the congregation saying something different. That's not, there's no concern here, right? What actually happens in the story that we have is that somebody's leading services. They say, Adonai Elohechem emet, emet v'yatziv, right? That's what he hears the person leading services do. And Rabbah says that that's incorrect, right? So what does Rabbah want him to do? Adonai Elohechem emet v'yatziv v'nachon v'kayam. That's what he would have preferred that this person do. All right, so according to the Talmud, how are we supposed to recite these words?
You say emet twice.
Follow Rabbah, or do we follow Rabbi Abdullah?
That's a good question.
Maybe if you're a reform, you do one way, and if you're conservative, you
Well, the Talmud has two different opinions, and they say what the halakha is for one thing, but they didn't say what it was for repeating emet.
Yeah. So let's take as first example, we are davening as we've been right now. So we're on Zoom. We're not a minyan. We said El Melech Ne'eman at the beginning of the Shema. We get to the end of the Shema. We're chanting it ostensibly out loud. The leader says, Ani Adonai Elohechem, Asher Hotzeiti Etchem Me'eretz Mitzrayim, Liot Lachem Le'Elohim. How do I end it?
Elohechem. You finish the verse, so you get to 248.
I
you don't want to add the emet.
Adonai Elohechem emet.
yeah.
That's what I do. Right? We're supposed to connect it. That was the initial point, is that we want to connect these two things. And
Now you're at 249.
Sorry?
Now you're at 249.
Who's counting?
Well, no, because the emet is the first word of the next prayer. And I'm only saying emet once.
Well, how do you start the next prayer then?
I'll do it again. Ani Adonai Elohechem emet v'yatziv v'nachon v'kayam v'yashar.
Oh, okay. So you leave out the first emet there. You leave out the second emet in the first line of the prayer.
Yeah. So
musically,
now,
it's part of the Shema.
Yeah, it's just there's at least no interruption, right? Whether you can have whether a pause would be an interruption or not, maybe a different question. It's confusing to have the word emet appear here and then to have it also appear here, because we're actually printing it twice in the Siddur, which is exactly what Rabbah says we're not supposed to do. And I'm not sure what that bracket is supposed to mean. Right?
But that's not in the Shabbat Siddur.
Yeah,
It's only
and the
in
Shabbat
Mikveh.
just does not even have it in brackets.
Yeah.
I thought it relates to the minyan.
Yeah, it's so now if we were, let's say we had a minion, I would do Ani Adonai Elohechem, and then I would wait for the leader to go in, and the leader would continue Adonai Elohechem Emet, right? And then I should say Emet v'yatziv v'nachon b'kayam. Right? So I've paused after Elohechem, but I've not said anything else. Right? By the leader saying those last three words out loud, then we get to our, in my count, I get to 248 because the leader's three words get added on to my 245 words. So anyway, this is it's confusing. And I'm not sure how you could publish a Siddur to fully explain it, because it's a little weird. And all of this is tradition anyway. Like it's not halakha
Written in
Moshe
stone.
Sinai. Sorry?
I said it was not written in stone.
It was not written in stone, right?
Was anything written in stone ever?
Oh,
The
lots of
Ten
things.
Commandments.
Yeah.